Hey everybody, welcome to the math lesson for today. We are learning lesson 2.1. You can go ahead and pause the video to get the title on as well as the date. The title for today is, What is a Decimal? The colors you'll need are blue-green, like an aqua color, and violet-red. Looks a little bit like bright pink right there. So take a minute to pause the video, go find those colors, get the title written, write the date, and lesson 2.1. You'll also want to find your Math Expressions Volume 1 book because we're going to be using that after the journal. Push pause on the video and then continue when you're ready. What is a decimal? We're first going to define exactly what a decimal is. So I'm going to put those colors to the side and right off to the side here. The phrase decimals. You might have recognized decimals as a little dot that appears sometimes in numbers or when dealing with money. It separates the dollars from the coins. That might be recognizable to you. But an actual definition for decimal that we are going to use is a mathematical symbol that separates whole numbers and parts. A mathematical symbol that separates whole numbers and parts. We're going to put a little arrow here. And we're going to say the parts that come after the decimal are just like fractions. Actually, instead of saying parts, I'm going to say the numbers. Or we'll say digits. That might be better. The digits that come after the decimal are just like fractions. Otherwise known as pieces. Remember, we just did a whole unit on how fractions are like pieces, and so are decimals. So the numbers or the digits that are in front of the decimals are whole, and the digits that come after the decimal are pieces. And that's going to be important to recognize. So I'm going to make this one be that violet red color. A mathematical symbol that separates whole numbers and parts. The digits that come after the decimal are just like fractions, or they're known as pieces. So let's go ahead and write a number really large. I'm going to take 2 lines to do it. Think about whether or not you know what this number, how this number would be said. Think about it for a minute. Try it to yourself. I bet some of you probably said 314.5. That is how most people would say it, but this number is correctly read as not 314, just 314 and 5/10. Remember in 4th grade you learned place value. Remember that first number to the right of the decimal is the tenths place. So you say the place value that the last digit ends in. So this number again is read as 314 and 5/10. Isn't that super interesting? We used a word here. Think about if you noticed what I said with this symbol. I said the word and. So we're going to actually write in words what that number is. 300. Don't sneak in the word and. There is not a decimal here. It's just 314. 314 and you say the number, which is 5, and you write what place value it was in. It was in the tenths. So that is how you correctly say that number. 314 and 5/10. So I'm just going to draw a little arrow over here to the word and. The only time in a number that you should say the word and is if there is a decimal. And it'll be super interesting for you over the next week or so to listen to how numbers are read around you, whether on TV or with a parent or an older sibling or maybe a younger niece or nephew. However it's read, if they say the word and there's not a decimal, they are saying it incorrectly. So for example, a lot of people would say 314 and 5/10. Did you catch it? 314. If I were to say 314, you don't need to write this, but look what it would look like. 314 and 5/10. That's what that number would be. But not even that really isn't even a number, because 0.14 doesn't equal 14 wholes, and that's what I want this part to equal. So you have to be very careful with how you read decimal numbers. Let's practice it together. You ready? Here we go. 314 and 5/10. I want you to do it one more time. Make sure you're saying it with me. 314 and 5/10. Let's come up with another one. Let's make this digit a little bit larger. 1,008.62. Don't be nervous about this. The very first thing I would do is recognize where the decimal is, and I would separate out. These are the wholes, and these are the pieces. Wholes, pieces. So you would say this number. Don't sneak in an and. There's not an and until there. 1,008. Notice that I didn't say 1,008. It is pronounced 1,008 and 62 what? What place value is that? Is it in the tenths? No, the tenths is just to the right. It is not in the tenths. It is in the hundredths. So you would say 1,008 and 62 hundredths. Let's write that out in words. 1,000, 1,008, and 62 hundredths. $1,008 and 62 hundredths. All right, let's box the decimal again. Make sure that it's very clear it was a decimal. Show me what word represents the decimal. It's and. And we have two numbers here that now have decimals, and I should know how to read them and say the and word correctly, and make sure to end in the correct place value. That's the last word of your number. What I'm going to do now with these is I'm going to give you an example of how I can take a number like this and prove that it is the same thing. This 0.5, this and 5/10 is the same thing as a fraction. Okay, you can represent numbers, those kinds of numbers, in two different ways. Those ways are a mixed number with wholes and a fraction, like we talked about in Unit 1, or you can represent it as a decimal, wholes and pieces, like that. Okay, let's try this number. I'm going to first write it as a decimal. .749.67. This number, say it with me from left to right. 749 and 67 what? What place value is that 7 in? Not the tenths, but the hundredths. So this number is 749 and 67 hundredths. Well, that is the same number as if I were just to write it like a mixed number with a fraction. Try it. 749. Well, that's just the whole, so it looks just like that. And the next part, 60 and 67 hundredths. How do I write 67 hundredths as a fraction? I write it like a 6/7 over 100. So when I chose to use the decimal, I'm going to put this in a cloud. This number, blue cloud, an aqua blue cloud, this number, 749.67, is the same as 749 with 67 over 100. Those are equivalent. I can represent my numbers as a mixed number or as a number with a decimal. Those are the same, called equivalent. It's really good to remember what tenths and hundredths look like. So what I want to do now is with the rest of your paper that's left on this journal is I want to create kind of a T-chart. And just like we've talked about before, a T-chart, we're going to go from red line to pink line. I'm going to split it in half the best I can, going all the way down off my paper like that. On this side, we're going to label it tenths. And you guessed it. On the right side, we're going to label it hundredths. Both of those ending with THS. Tenths and hundredths. Okay? An example of tenths with a fraction might be this. 6/10. Let's go ahead and write what it would look like as a decimal. What does 6/10 look like as a decimal? Well, you don't have any whole numbers, so you have to have a 0. There's nothing in the ones place. And you have to show the decimal to show that I'm moving on to pieces. And I put a 6 in the tenths place. Remember, the tenths place is the one just to the right of the decimal. So it can be represented as 6 over 10 or 0.6. Why the 0? Because it's not a mixed number. There was not a whole number in front of this. If this was, let's say, 5 and 6/10, it would be 5.6. But there was not a whole number, so you represent it with 0. Let's try another one of those. What does 1/10 look like as a decimal? I want you to pause the video and write it out for yourself and then see if you got it correct. 1/10 as a decimal looks like this. There's a 0 in the ones place because there's no whole numbers, a decimal, and a 1 in the tenths place. That, my friends, is 1/10. The last one we're going to try over here is 9/10. This time I'm going to write it as the decimal, and I want you to work backwards and tell me what the fraction would be. If you got 9 over 10, you did it correctly. Let's quickly move on to the hundredth side. Remember, the hundredth side is 2 places after the decimal. So if I had a fraction that looked like this, 71 hundredths, how would I represent that as a decimal? Well, are there any whole numbers out in front of the fraction? No, so I have a 0. And I'm talking about pieces, itty-bitty pieces. We know how tiny hundredths are. They're tiny. They are 10 times smaller than tenths. Tiny. And 71, making sure that the 1 ends in the hundredths place. And it did. The 1 is in the hundredths place. All right, why don't you try this one? Let's try 11 hundredths. Pause the video. Hopefully you wrote 11 hundredths as 0.11. The second 1 in this situation is in the hundredths place. Why a 0? Because there's not a whole number. The last one we're going to try is going to be a little tricky, and I want to see who can figure it out. This is like a little challenge. 9 hundredths. Go ahead and pause the video if you want to try it on your own. If you want to stick with me, you sure can. Think about it. Is there a whole number out in front of the fraction? No. So it still is a 0 point. And then it's 9 hundredths. So if I put a 9 right here, that says 9/10. So what if I just quickly add a 0? That doesn't say 9 hundredths. What does that say? 90 hundredths. It can't be that. So what am I going to do? I have to have a 9 in the hundredths. So why don't I go ahead and put a 9 in there right now? See how I put a 9 in the hundredths over here? Who do you think flies in to save the day and save a place value? 0, the hero. Do-do-do-do. 0, the hero. Let's write that off to the side. We're going to be using this phrase a lot. Zero the hero. Zero the hero flies in and saves place values. Okay, we'll learn about that a little bit later. Check into the next video to find out what's next.